It's hard for me to be here today talking about my deceased son. I have to. I'm his voice. I'm not here for the sympathy and a pat on the back, as many people stated in the town of Newtown. I'm here to speak up for my son.
Those painful words from Neil Heslin. He's the father of Jesse Lewis, which was, Jesse, as you know, a 6-year-old victim in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. And his dad urged the Senate panel today to pass legislation to prevent another gun massacre. Today, the Senate's first hearing on a revamped assault weapons ban proposal introduced by Senator Dianne Feinstein. It would ban 157 types of military-style weapons, and it faces an uphill battle in Congress. Now, since Newtown, gun reform has quickly become a hot-button issue nationwide. And I told you before there was a lot of polls out, and this question also posed by the Wall Street Journal NBC. It shows broad support for stricter gun control legislation. And if you want to see impact on not just public sentiment, but also some dollars and cents, in Chicago, views on gun control played a large role in yesterday's special primary, a Democratic primary to replace disgraced Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg's super PAC poured more than $2 million into the race, blanketing the Windy City with ads condemning one candidate in the race who has an A rating from the NRA. It seemed to have worked because Robin Kelly, former state representative and gun control supporter, won. It's interesting. There's few things anything that can get 90%. I talk about this, Dominic, all the time, but you see that with background checks on these polls. The one thing that I got from these poll numbers was it wasn't just in New York and LA. In rural, suburban, and urban markets, opinion on gun control has changed. In rural markets, 10% more people since Newtown want assault weapons bans and tighter controls on the big 4 issues, background checks, database, as well as the ammo clips and the assault weapons. It seems that it's not just our imagination that the general public feels one way. Do you think it translates into a change in policies, though?
Not necessarily so. More of a factor in Washington is money. Who is going to fund which candidate and whether or not that candidate will be primaried. Those are the top considerations with elected officials. It shouldn't be that way. That's not the American way. It's not our history, but that's where we stand today. Whoever has the most money backing the candidate, if they fear the NRA, in the past it's shown they will stay with the positions of the NRA.
Anthony, isn't it a little imagined, like, for example, Grover Norquist was this feared, you say the word here and everybody all of a sudden said, I signed the pledge, I signed the pledge. But it was found out, as we saw in the last election cycle, he was not an imagined boogeyman, but he didn't have nearly the amount of juice as everybody gave him credit for. I look at the money the NRA actually spent in the last election. It seemed more, I would have expected it was a bigger number. Or is the NRA feared unnecessarily so by some in those swing districts?
I think, yeah, if anybody's going to give you a trough of cash for your campaign, you're certainly going to think twice when voting or coming out publicly for or against a particular issue. I want to bring it back to Chicago because Bloomberg knows this. He's ponying up money to try to get his people in play because he knows that that's how he's going to get what he wants accomplished in his agenda nationally with all of the mayors. The problem is that you look at Chicago with very strict gun laws, and there's over 40 people that have already been killed, and not with machine guns, with handguns. And there has to be talk about that, and I feel like nobody's really discussing that issue. And that's something that we have to address.
Respectful, I think you've got the right group, the NRA, but the wrong districts. I don't think it's swing districts that are going to be the ones the NRA is going to focus on or have much of an impact on at this point. I think you're looking at primaries in marginalized districts, in heavily Democratic districts and heavily Republican districts. Yesterday's race in Chicago, heavily Democratic, and more pro-gun control candidate wins thanks to Bloomberg's money. When it comes to the NRA's impact, I think that's going to be primarily in districts that are very Republican, where you're putting pressure on an incumbent or an established Republican candidate from their right not to cave on gun control.
You know, Congresswoman, I know we've got to go to break soon, but it was interesting. I assumed assault weapons weren't going to happen and ammo clips weren't. But then I saw that there was, within Republican circles, more of an appetite for this than maybe some people thought. Do you think the public would be surprised at how many Republicans post-Newtown would support measures that they wouldn't have had in the past?
Well, I think the fact that there is, I mean, this was a hideous event. Nobody wants to risk having another Newtown happen anywhere. And the question is how best to do that. There certainly is broad support for universal background checks, and that alone would be something
Would that get passage from House Republicans? you
I
think?
think House Republicans are definitely turning their
How about a
attention toward
database?
that. That's something that at least has to have appropriate discussion, the right kind of discussion, and also mental health issues.
We hear there's going to be an up and down vote. You think there will be?
On background checks?
On all four of these components individually, the President of the State of the Union said it. LaPierre even said, I'm for it. I'm not going to condemn them if they do it. You think at the very minimum we'll have an up and down vote so we'll know where people stand on the 4 key issues of gun control?
I think that's something that could take place, and I think there would probably at least be movement in the direction of background checks.
And Richard, I got to hit a break in 30 seconds, but I'm curious, if New York told us anything about what passed and Republicans coming on board with Democrats, at least to me surprising numbers, what's the lesson out of Albany?
New York is unusual and should not be a model for the politics of Washington or any other place. What you saw in New York was a function of a weakened Republican Party, a Rockefeller Republican Party in many cases. What's going on around the rest of the country is much closer to what was described by my colleagues, and forget about it.
All right, forget about it. Thank you. RFL is back after this. Stay with us.